2 weeks of living under my daughter-in-law's roof, she slapped me across the face and said, "Clean that floor properly." Everyone laughed, while I stood there holding back tears, but the laughter stopped the moment my son, a military officer, walked through the door. That's when everything changed. Before we go on, if stories like this move you, tap subscribe and tell me in the comments which city you're watching from. I love seeing how far these stories travel. My name is Viola, and at 64, I never imagined I'd be scrubbing someone else's kitchen floor, fighting the sting of humiliation. Yet there I was, on my knees, trying to make their linoleum shine, while Romy, my daughter-in-law, stood above me like a supervisor. "You missed a spot," she said, pointing with her perfectly manicured finger. Her voice was honey-sweet, but her eyes held nothing but disdain. 2 weeks. That's how long I'd been here, ever since I lost everything. My husband's long illness had drained our savings, and when he passed, the medical bills finally caught up with me. The bank took the house we'd lived in for 37 years. By the time my son Everett returned from his deployment, I had nowhere left to go. Romy offered that I stay with her parents. "Just for a little while," she said. I thought it was kindness. I didn't realize I was walking into my own quiet humiliation. "Mrs. Viola, can you clean the upstairs bathroom when you're done?" That was Patricia, Romy's mother, calling from the living room without even looking up from her favorite TV show. "Of course," I whispered, my knees aching on the cold tile. I kept telling myself to be grateful. At least I had a roof over my head. But that gratitude was getting harder to hold on to every day. Yesterday, Romy complained about the way I folded her laundry. The day before, she made me redo the dishes because a single glass had a watermark. And this morning, she'd handed me a handwritten list of chores, like I was her employee, not her husband's mother. As I scrubbed, she sat scrolling through her phone. "When Everett gets back," she said casually, "we need to talk about your long-term plans. This arrangement was supposed to be temporary." I froze. "I understand," I murmured. "I'm looking into options." "Good," she said, "because honestly, having another person in the house is stressful for everyone, especially someone who, well, needs so much assistance." Assistance, the word stung. I wanted to remind her that I'd raised Everett on my own after his father left, that I'd worked 3 jobs to give him a better life, the life that made his career possible. But instead, I stayed silent. "Oh, and Viola," Romy added sweetly, and I'd learned that her sweetest tone always came before something cruel. "Please be careful with the dishes. You chipped one of Mother's good plates yesterday." I hadn't chipped anything, but I nodded. "I'll be more careful." By evening, my hands were raw from bleach and my back screamed with pain, but I finished every task on her list. That's when I heard voices from the living room. Romy's parents had guests over for coffee. Through the doorway, I caught snippets of laughter. "Such a burden! Never thought we'd have to deal with..." My chest tightened. I knew who they were talking about. "Viola," Romy called out cheerfully, "can you bring some coffee for our guests?" I wiped my hands, balanced the tray with their finest china, the very set I'd been told not to touch, and stepped into the room. "Oh, how lovely," one of the women said. "You're so lucky to have help around the house." Patricia laughed lightly. "Well, it's only temporary. Viola lost her home and needed somewhere to stay." Her words cut deeper than any slap. To them, I wasn't family, just a pitiful story to tell over coffee. I forced a smile, placed the tray down carefully, and quietly returned to the kitchen, where no one could see the tears I refused to let fall. I was putting away the coffee supplies when I heard Patricia's voice again, louder this time. "The poor thing tries to help, but she really doesn't know how to care for a proper household," she said. "Yesterday she even used the wrong cleaner on my hardwood floors." More laughter followed. My hands tightened around the coffee canister until it rattled. "Mother, be nice," Romy said lightly, though there was no real kindness in her tone. "She's doing her best. Still, it's been quite an adjustment having someone who doesn't know our routines." Patricia sighed in mock sympathy. "Of course, dear. We're just grateful we can help family in need." Family in need. as if I were some distant relative they barely remembered, not the woman who had raised the man Romy married. I finished tidying the counter and started toward the stairs when Romy appeared in the hallway. "Oh, Viola, one more thing. Could you clean this floor again? I just noticed some spots you missed." I looked down. The floor gleamed. It couldn't have been cleaner. "I don't see any—" "There," she said, pointing to a corner that looked identical to the rest, "and that one looks streaky." Then I saw it, that glimmer in her eyes, the tiny, satisfied smile. She was enjoying this. "Of course," I whispered and turned toward the supply closet. "Actually," she called after me, "let's make sure you do it right this time." She followed as I pulled out the bucket and mop again. My knees complained as I bent down, and I had to steady myself on the handle as I stood. "You know, Viola," she said casually, "you really should put more effort into this. A job worth doing is worth doing well, don't you think?" I nodded, focusing on the rhythmic motion of the mop. From the living room came bursts of laughter, the guests enjoying their stories and coffee. Romy kept talking, her voice losing its fake sweetness. "When I was growing up, my mother taught me that if you can't do something properly, you shouldn't do it at all. Maybe that's why you're in this situation now." The mop froze in my hands. "Excuse me?" I asked quietly. "I'm just saying," she shrugged, inspecting her nails. "Maybe if you'd been better with money or planning, you wouldn't have to rely on other people now." Each word landed like a blow. As if I were to blame for my husband's illness, the endless medical bills, the home we lost. "I did my best," I said softly. "Did you, though?" she asked, tilting her head. "From where I'm standing, it looks like a lifetime of poor choices." The laughter from the other room grew louder, echoing in my ears. There I was, a woman who had worked her entire life, who had raised a son alone, now being lectured by someone half my age about choices. "You're working too slowly," Romy said suddenly. "The guests can see you from the doorway. It's embarrassing. They probably think we don't know how to supervise our domestic help properly." Domestic help. Those two words burned worse than any insult. I tried to move faster, but my body couldn't keep up. My knees throbbed, my back screamed, my hands cramped around the handle. "This is ridiculous," she muttered loudly. "You can't even clean a simple floor." And then it happened. She stepped forward. "Move!" she snapped. Before I could react, her hand struck my cheek. The sharp sound cut through the house like a crack of thunder. I stumbled backward, gripping the wall to steady myself. My cheek burned hot, my eyes blurred, but I refused to cry. "Clean this floor right," Romy said coldly. "And stop being so dramatic about it." The laughter from the living room stopped. I felt their eyes on me. When I turned my head, Patricia and her guests were staring. But there was no shock, only amusement. One of them was even smiling. "Oh my," Patricia said with a little laugh. "Romy certainly knows how to handle difficult situations." Another guest chuckled. "Sometimes you just have to be firm with people who don't understand boundaries." They were laughing at a 64-year-old woman being humiliated in her own son's family home. I stood frozen, palm pressed to my burning cheek, realizing I wasn't a guest here. I was entertainment. Romy bent down, picked up the mop, and shoved it into my trembling hands. "Try again," she said flatly. "This time, do it right." I swallowed hard, blinked away the tears, and forced myself to kneel once more. Not here, not in front of them. They wouldn't see me break. And then, a sudden sound outside. A car door slammed. Heavy, familiar footsteps crossed the porch. The front door opened. And there stood my son, Everett, still in his military uniform, staring at the scene that would change everything. His duffel bag hung from one shoulder, dust still on his boots. My son, Everett, had come home early from training. His eyes swept over the scene in a heartbeat, me on my knees with a mop, tears threatening to fall, my cheek still red from the slap, Romy standing above me, arms crossed, and the guests in the doorway, some still smiling. Everett's voice came out low, controlled, dangerous. "What's going on here?" No one answered. Then his voice thundered through the hallway. "I said, what's going on here?" The laughter vanished. Every person in that house froze. I'd never heard my son sound like that before. Not as a boy, not even in his angriest moments. This was the voice of a man who'd seen battle, who knew how to command a room and wouldn't tolerate cruelty. Romy moved first. She rushed toward him, tears instantly appearing. "Everett, thank goodness you're home," she cried. "Your mother has been so difficult, I don't know what else to do." "Difficult?" Everett's tone cut like ice. His gaze shifted to me, still kneeling, mop in hand. "What do you mean difficult?" Romy pressed a hand to her chest, voice trembling just enough to sound practiced. "I've been trying to help her, to give her little chores so she can feel useful, but she refuses to listen. Just now she was being so disrespectful that I—" "You had to what?" The air in the hallway went still. Everett took a step closer, his jaw tightening as his eyes locked on the red mark across my cheek. "Did you just hit my mother?" Romy blinked fast. "I barely touched her. She was being unreasonable, and You hit my mother." The explosion in his voice shook the walls. Patricia's guests scrambled to gather their things, murmuring excuses as they backed toward the door. But Everett wasn't finished. "Mom," he said, softer now, "stand up." I pushed myself to my feet, my knees stiff from the cold floor. He reached out, steadying me with one hand. Gentle, careful. That small kindness almost undid me. Then he turned, eyes locked on Romy. "Explain why my mother was on her hands and knees scrubbing your floor." Patricia hurried to speak from the living room doorway. "She's not a servant, Everett. She's family. She was just helping while she stays here." "Helping?" Everett repeated, scanning the spotless entryway. "This floor looks like a mirror. Why was she cleaning it?" Romy lifted her chin. "Because she missed spots the first time. I'm just maintaining standards in this house." "Standards." He said the word slowly as if it tasted bitter. "And your standards include striking a 64-year-old woman? I told you I can still see your handprint." And then Romy made the mistake that ended everything. She crossed her arms and said sharply, "Well, maybe if she did things right the first time, I wouldn't have to correct her." Silence fell so heavy you could hear the clock ticking. Even Patricia's remaining guests stopped moving. Everett's voice dropped to a whisper that carried farther than a shout. "Did you just say you needed to correct my mother?" Patricia tried again, weakly. "Everett, honey, you don't understand." "No," he said, eyes never leaving Romy's. "You don't understand." He stepped closer, his tone firm but shaking with emotion. "This woman raised me alone after my father left when I was 8. Do you know what she did to keep us fed?" Romy said nothing. The color had drained from her face. "She worked 3 jobs," he went on. "She cleaned offices at night, worked in a factory during the day, and took in laundry on weekends so I could have food, a uniform, and a chance at a better life." I tried to speak. "Everett, please." He lifted a hand. "No, Mom. She needs to hear this." He looked back at Romy. "Do you know why she stayed at that factory? Because it paid 50 cents more an hour than the others. Do you know what happened there?" My heart clenched. I'd never told him the full story. Everett's voice cracked as he continued. "She lost 3 fingers in a machine accident when I was 15 because the safety guards were broken and she was too afraid to complain. She needed that job to buy my school clothes." Gasps filled the room. Romy's eyes widened. She'd never known. I'd always hidden my hands beneath gloves. "And did she ever complain?" Everett's voice shook. "Did she ever make me feel guilty for what she sacrificed?" "No. She told me it was a cooking accident and went right back to work the next week." Tears slid down my face. I couldn't stop them. I'd never heard my son speak of our past with such raw, steady love. "She put me through school," Everett said finally, his voice quiet but unbreakable. "And this is how you repay her?" He wasn't shouting anymore. He didn't need to. The weight in his words was enough to silence the entire house. "She saved every penny," Everett said, his voice breaking slightly. So I could go to college, so I could join the military as an officer instead of enlisted. She gave up dating, gave up her own happiness, just so I could have a future. Romy whispered. I didn't know. Everett turned to her, his eyes blazing. You didn't know because you never cared to ask. You never wanted to know anything about the woman who made me the man you claim to love. Patricia finally found her voice. Everett, dear, I think you're overreacting. Romy was only trying to what? Everett spun toward her. Trying to humiliate my mother? Trying to turn her into your housekeeper? Trying to make her feel small and unwanted? Patricia's husband stepped forward. Now see here, young man. You can't just come into our house and… Everett let out a bitter laugh. Your house? This is where you've been keeping my mother for 2 weeks, making her sleep in your basement and treating her like staff. The guest room isn't in the basement, Patricia said quickly. Show me, Everett said flatly. No one moved for a moment. Then Patricia, pale and hesitant, led us toward a narrow door beneath the stairs. She opened it to reveal a cramped space that smelled of mildew-bare walls, a cot in the corner, boxes stacked to the ceiling. The ceiling was so low that Everett had to duck his head. There was no window, no warmth, just a flickering bulb and damp air. You've been making my mother sleep down here? His voice shook with disbelief. It's perfectly adequate, Patricia insisted. She said she was grateful for any space we could offer. Everett turned toward me, and I saw something break inside him. Mom, why didn't you tell me? You were away, I said softly. You had enough to focus on. I didn't want to worry you. He ran a hand through his hair. Worry me? Mom, you could never be a burden. You're my mother, the most important person in my life. Behind him, Romy made a small noise. Everett turned, his voice sharp again. That's right, more important than you, more important than anyone. This woman gave everything she had, and you treated her like she was nothing. I was just trying to help her feel useful, Romy said weakly, by making her scrub floors on her hands and knees, by slapping her in front of your guests, by laughing while she cried. It wasn't like that. It was exactly like that, Everett's voice thundered. I walked in and saw it with my own eyes, my mother on the floor, crying, your handprint still on her face, while a room full of people stood there smiling. The truth landed like a hammer. No one spoke. Everett's tone lowered, cold and steady. You know what hurts the most? She was still grateful. Even after all of this, she was thankful for a roof over her head. Because that's who she is, that's the kind of family you married into. A family that protects one another, respects one another, and would never, ever let someone suffer alone. He paused, scanning the room, his gaze cutting through the silence. But that's not who you are, is it? Romy's composure cracked. Everett, please. I love you. I love our family. I was just stressed having another person in the house. Another person? Everett repeated, stunned. That other person is my mother. She's not a stranger. She's the reason I'm standing here today. I know, No, you don't. If you truly did, you would never have treated her this way. He turned to me, his expression softening but resolute. Mom, get your things. We're leaving. Everett, where will we go? I don't care if we have to sleep in my car, he said. We're not staying here another minute. You can't just leave, Romy cried. We're married. We're supposed to work through problems together. Everett looked at her for a long moment. Some problems can be solved, he said quietly. Some things can't. And what you've done can't be undone. The weight of those words settled over the room like stone. For the first time in weeks, I wasn't afraid. Not of where I'd go. Not of what would happen next. Because I wasn't alone anymore. Everett stood tall, his shoulders tense, his jaw set. Romy reached for him again, her voice trembling. Everett, please, can we talk about this privately? He pulled his arm away as if her touch burned. Privately? Like how you privately decided to mistreat my mother while I was gone. I didn't mistreat her. Then what would you call it? His tone turned icy. Making her sleep in a basement, forcing her to clean spotless floors, striking her in front of guests? Romy's face flushed. She wasn't doing things right. Someone had to. Had to what? Teach her? Correct her? Everett shook his head slowly. My mother raised me by herself, held 3 jobs, kept a home running for decades. You really think she doesn't know how to clean a floor? That's when Patricia made one final, terrible mistake. Well, honestly, she began, people from different backgrounds sometimes have different... Everett's voice cut through her words like a blade. Don't you dare make this about background or class. This isn't about where she came from. It's about the kind of person you chose to be. Silence. Patricia looked away. Romy's tears finally spilled, and for the first time I felt the weight of 2 weeks of humiliation lift from my shoulders. Everett turned to me, his eyes soft but steady. Let's go home, Mom. I nodded, and as we climbed the stairs together, leaving that dark, airless room behind, I realized something simple but powerful. Sometimes, love doesn't raise its voice. Sometimes it just shows up at the door, right when you need it most. Everett turned toward Patricia with such fury that she actually took a step back. What exactly are you implying about my mother's background? Patricia stammered, realizing too late that she'd crossed a line. I only meant that perhaps she isn't used to maintaining a home of this, caliber. That word, caliber, hit the air like a slap. My cheeks burned with fresh humiliation. Everett's voice went quiet, dangerous. Caliber? He repeated slowly. You mean because we didn't have money? Because my mother couldn't afford a house like this? Now, Everett, Patricia's husband began, hands raised. Let's all calm down. No! Everett cut in sharply. Let's not calm down. Let's talk about caliber. My mother's house might not have been as big as this one, but it was clean, it was warm, and it was filled with love. Can you say the same about this place? He gestured around the damp basement. You put a 64-year-old woman in a room that smells of mildew and call it hospitality. You make her work like staff and call it helping. You humiliate her in front of guests and call it maintaining standards, and you think that makes you better because you have more money? Everett, you're being unfair, Romy said, her voice shaking. My parents opened their home to your mother when she had nowhere to go. Everett's eyes narrowed. After lying to me about her situation for months? The words struck like lightning. I looked up at him, confused. What do you mean lying? Everett turned to me, his jaw tight. Mom, when did you lose the house? 3 months ago, I said softly, but I told you not to worry, that I had a place to stay. With who? You said you were staying with Mrs. Henderson from church. I felt heat rise to my cheeks. I was at first, but her daughter came home and needed the room, so where were you staying before you came here? The question hung heavy. I couldn't meet his eyes. Mom, where were you staying? In my car, I whispered. The room went silent. Everett froze, color draining from his face. You were sleeping in your car? Only for a few days, I said quickly. It wasn't that bad. The weather was mild. I had a blanket. A few days? Everett turned toward Romy, his voice trembling. How long did you know about this? Romy's face went pale. I don't know what you mean. Don't lie to me. How long did you know my mother was homeless? I didn't know she was living in her car, she blurted. But you knew she'd lost the house. Silence. Answer me, Romy. She swallowed hard. 2 months. I've known for 2 months. Everett actually staggered, like the words had hit him physically. 2 months. My mother has been without a home for 2 months. And you didn't tell me? You were deployed, Romy said weakly. There was nothing you could do from overseas. Nothing I could do. Everett's voice echoed off the walls. I could have sent money. I could have made arrangements. I could have requested emergency leave. You were in the middle of an important mission. More important than my mother? The question landed like thunder. No one spoke. Everyone knew the answer. Nothing was more important to Everett than family. He took a slow breath, his voice quiet now, almost calm. How did you even find out, Romy? She hesitated, glancing toward her parents. She called here, looking for you. When? Right after you left for training. She was crying, saying she'd lost the house and didn't know what to do. She asked me to have you call her. I remembered that phone call, the moment I'd swallowed my pride and begged for help. And what did you tell her? Everett asked. That you were busy? That you couldn't be disturbed. The admission sucked the air out of the room. She kept calling, Romy added quietly. Every few days, always crying, always asking for you. Everett's face hardened. For 2 months, my mother called you asking for help, and you never told me? I handled it, Romy said weakly. I told her she could come stay here once you got back. You handled it? Everett's disbelief was raw. By letting her sleep in her car for 2 months while you handled it? The truth spread through the room like fire. She hadn't just hidden my situation, she'd stopped Everett from ever finding out. Everett's voice went cold. There's more, isn't there? Romy's silence said everything. What else haven't you told me? She finally whispered. She asked about borrowing a little money, to help with a deposit on a small apartment, and I told her we couldn't afford it. Everett gave a hollow laugh. Couldn't afford it? I have $30,000 in savings, money I've been putting aside for our future. That money was for us, for our home, our family, Romy cried. My mother is my family, Everett said. The words echoed through the basement, final and absolute, and in that moment, everyone understood. Romy had gambled on Everett choosing her over me, and she'd lost. Everett's voice was calm now, almost eerily steady. You let my mother sleep in her car for 2 months while I had money sitting in the bank that could have helped her. You intercepted her calls for help. You lied to me about her situation, and when you finally allowed her to stay here, you treated her like a servant. He looked around the room, each word striking like a hammer. And you thought I'd never find out. No one moved. No one dared breathe. We were going to tell you, Patricia said weakly. Once you were settled back home. You were going to tell me you'd been mistreating my mother? Everett cut in. We weren't mistreating her. Then what do you call making her sleep in a basement and striking her because you didn't like how she cleaned? No one had an answer. Everett turned to me, his expression softening, guilt clouding his eyes. Mom, I'm so sorry. I should have checked on you more. I should have called you directly instead of going through Romy. You were serving your country, I said quietly. I didn't want to distract you. You could never be a distraction, he whispered. You're my mother. He took my hands gently, and I saw him notice my missing fingers, the old scars he hadn't really looked at in years. His jaw tightened. I failed you. No, you didn't. Yes, I did, he said firmly. I trusted someone who didn't deserve it. I let someone hurt you because I was too blind to see who she really was. He turned toward Romy, his voice low but final. Pack your things. She blinked, stunned. What? Pack your things, he repeated. We're done. Romy's face crumpled. Everett, no, you can't mean that. We're married. People fight. They work things out. This isn't a fight, Romy, Everett said. This is you showing me exactly who you are, and I don't like what I see. I can change. I can do better. You had 2 months to be better, he said sharply. 2 months while my mother was sleeping in her car calling you for help, and instead of kindness, you chose cruelty. He turned toward the stairs. Come on, Mom. Let's go get your things. Everett, wait! Romy grabbed his arm. You're making a mistake. Your mother's manipulating you. She's making you choose between us. Everett stopped and looked back at her. No, Romy. I'm not choosing between you and my mother. I'm choosing between right and wrong, and you're wrong. We climbed the narrow basement steps together. Behind us, I heard Romy start to cry real tears this time, not the ones she used to get her way. But it was too late. Some things, once broken, can never be repaired, and my son's trust in his wife was one of them. The drive to Everett's apartment was quiet except for the faint sound of sobbing echoing from the house we left behind. Everett's hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles turned white. A muscle twitched in his jaw, anger and heartbreak, fighting beneath the surface. "I should have known," he said finally. "I should have seen what kind of person she was." "Everett, you couldn't have known." "Yes, I could have." His voice was thick with guilt. "There were signs. The way she talked about people with less money, the way she treated waiters and store clerks. I told myself she was just particular about standards. But it wasn't that. It was who she really was, and I chose not to see it. I wanted to comfort him, but I knew he needed to face that truth himself. As we drove through the familiar streets of town, I looked out the window at everything I'd once known, the places where I'd raised my son, built a life with his father, and learned how to survive. For the first time, they looked different. Smaller, maybe, but also peaceful. "I'm not going back to her," Everett said suddenly. "Son, you don't have to make big decisions right now. You're upset, and rightfully so." "No, Mom." He parked the car and turned to me. "This isn't something I'll just get over. What she did to you, how she treated you, the lies she told, that's not something you come back from." I studied his face, seeing the same fierce determination that had carried him through life. "Marriage is hard work," I said softly. "People make mistakes." "This wasn't a mistake. A mistake is forgetting to call you back or saying something unkind. This was deliberate. She made a choice to let you suffer, and she made that choice every single day for 2 months." He was right, of course, but after a lifetime of forgiving and making excuses for others, it was strange and freeing to stop. "What about your plans?" I asked. He exhaled slowly. "What plans? I thought I was building a future with someone who understood family, loyalty, sacrifice, but I was wrong. She doesn't understand any of that." We sat in silence for a few moments, each lost in thought. Finally, Everett got out, came around the car, and lifted my small suitcase, the only things I had left. His apartment was modest but warm, simple furniture, neat, quiet, peaceful. It felt like safety. "You can take the bedroom," he said, setting down my bag. "I'll sleep on the couch." "Absolutely not," I protested. "I won't take your bed." "Mom, no arguments," he said with a small smile. "You've been sleeping on a cot in a basement. My couch will feel like a 5-star hotel." I couldn't help but smile back. It was the first real smile I'd seen on his face since that awful day. "Okay," he said softly, "but just for now. We'll figure something better soon." And for the first time in weeks, as I sat on my son's couch surrounded by peace instead of judgment, I realized that losing everything had led me right back to what mattered most: love, dignity, and family. Sometimes life has to take everything away to remind you what's worth holding on to. That night, as I lay on my son's couch listening to him move quietly around the bedroom, I realized I was thinking about the future for the first time in months. Since losing the house, every day had just been about surviving. But now, surrounded by my son's quiet strength and unconditional love, I began to imagine possibilities again. The next morning, Everett made coffee and toast. We sat at his small kitchen table, sunlight spilling through the blinds, just like we used to when he was a little boy. It felt like it was us against the world again. "I've been thinking," he said slowly, "about what we should do next." "We?" "Yes, we. You're not going through this alone anymore, Mom. I should never have let you go through it alone in the first place." I reached across the table and covered his hand with mine. "You were serving your country," I said softly. "You were doing exactly what you should have been doing." He sighed. "Maybe. But that doesn't change the fact that you needed me, and I wasn't here." Before I could respond, there was a knock at the door. Everett's expression darkened instantly. "Stay here," he said, standing up. But I followed him anyway. Through the peephole, we saw Romy standing in the hallway, still in the same clothes from yesterday, her makeup streaked, her hair undone. She'd clearly been crying all night. "Everett, please." Her voice trembled through the door. "I know you're in there. We need to talk." There's nothing to talk about, Everett said firmly. Yes, there is. I love you. I made mistakes, but we can work through this. No, we can't. Please, she begged, just let me explain. Let me apologize properly. Everett hesitated, conflict flickering in his eyes. Part of him still wanted to believe she could make things right, but another part remembered what she'd done. 5 minutes, he said finally, unlocking the door. Romy stepped inside, her eyes finding mine immediately. Viola. I'm so sorry, she said, voice shaking. I know I was wrong. I know I hurt you, and I'm sorry. I nodded but stayed silent. Her words felt practiced, not sincere. I was under stress, she continued quickly, having another person in the house, trying to make everything perfect for when you came home. I took it out on your mother, and that was wrong. Everett's tone was icy calm. You were stressed? So you mistreated my mother? I didn't mistreat her. You made her sleep in a basement. You forced her to clean floors. You hit her. What would you call that? Romy's voice broke. I was just trying to help her feel useful. I thought if she had things to do, she wouldn't feel like such a burden. That word burden hit me like a punch. Everett's face darkened again. My mother is not a burden, he said slowly. That's not what I meant. Yes, it is, he cut in. That's exactly how you saw her. Something inconvenient you had to deal with until I came home. Everett, please. And the lies, he continued. 2 months of her sleeping in her car. You knew, and you said nothing. How do you explain that? Romy's tears returned, real ones this time. I panicked. I didn't know what to do. You were away. I couldn't reach you. You thought ignoring her would somehow fix it? I was going to help her when you came back. You were going to what? Keep treating her like a servant? Keep humiliating her? That's when I finally spoke. Romy, I said quietly. Both of them turned to me. Do you remember what you said to me yesterday, right before you struck me? She shook her head, but I saw in her eyes that she remembered perfectly. You told me, maybe if I'd managed my life better, I wouldn't have to rely on anyone else. I stood slowly, feeling stronger than I had in months. Do you remember saying that? I was upset. I didn't mean... Yes, you did mean it. That's what you really think of me. That I'm some kind of failure who brought my problems on myself. That's not true. It is true. And that's why this can't be fixed with apologies and promises to do better. I looked at Everett, then back at Romy. Some things can't be taken back. Some words can't be unspoken. I love him, Romy cried, reaching for Everett. I love you, I stepped between them. No, you love the idea of him. You love saying your husband serves his country. You love the respect, the comfort, the image of a perfect life. But you don't love him. Because if you did, you would have loved the people who made him who he is. You would have respected the sacrifices that shaped him. You would have seen me as a blessing, not a burden. Romy's mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. And if you truly loved him, I said softly, you never would have done anything to cause him this much pain. The truth of that filled the room like thunder after lightning. Everett looked at her, the woman he'd once loved, and I saw the last bit of that love fade from his eyes. I want you to leave, he said quietly. Right now. And don't come back. Romy looked between us, searching for some way to change his mind, but there wasn't one. The damage was done. After she left, Everett and I sat in silence for a long time. Are you okay? I finally asked. He thought for a moment. I think I will be. It hurts knowing I married someone capable of such cruelty. But I'd rather live with the truth than a lie. I reached across the table and squeezed his hand. The truth always hurts first, I said softly, but it heals too. For the first time in months, I felt peace, because even though we'd lost so much, we still had each other, and sometimes, that's more than enough. I'm sorry your marriage is ending because of me, I said quietly. Everett shook his head. It's not ending because of you, Mom. It's ending because of who she chose to be when she thought no one important was watching. That afternoon, Everett started making calls. First to a lawyer about filing for divorce, then to his commanding officer to update his emergency contacts and beneficiaries, and finally, to a realtor. "I'm looking for a 2-bedroom apartment," he said. "You don't have to do that," I told him. "I can find my own place." "With what money? With what job?" He wasn't being cruel, just practical. "Mom, you're 64 years old and you've lost everything. There's no shame in letting your son help you get back on your feet." "I don't want to be a burden." Everett's voice turned sharp. "Don't ever use that word about yourself. You are not a burden. You're my mother, the person who sacrificed everything so I could have a good life. Now it's my turn to take care of you." That night, lying on his couch again, I realized something inside me had shifted. For the first time since losing the house, since those weeks of humiliation, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Hope and pride. Proud of my son for standing up for what was right. Proud of myself for finally speaking the truth instead of quietly accepting scraps of dignity. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new choices, but tonight I was safe. I was loved. And I was no longer alone. That was enough. More than enough. It was everything. 3 weeks later, Everett and I had fallen into a rhythm that felt natural. He left early for base each morning, and I spent my days job hunting, looking at small apartments, and slowly rebuilding the confidence that had been stripped away. The divorce papers were filed. Romy had been silent since that day in Everett's apartment. I'd expected drama calls, letters, pleas for forgiveness, but there was nothing. It was as if she'd simply vanished. "She moved back in with her parents," Everett told me one evening as we ate dinner together. "Apparently she's telling everyone I chose my mother over her." I set down my fork. "Well, that's not entirely untrue." Everett shook his head. "No, Mom, it's completely untrue. I didn't choose you over her. I chose right over wrong. I chose treating people with dignity over treating them like they don't matter. She just happened to be on the wrong side of that choice." That same week, the phone rang with a call that would change everything. "Mrs. Harrington?" The voice on the line was warm and professional. "This is Margaret Chen from the Riverside Community Library. I understand you're looking for employment?" I gripped the phone tighter. "Yes, I am." "Your son gave us your name," she said. "He mentioned you have experience in bookkeeping and administration. We're looking for someone to help manage our volunteer programs and assist with administrative work." I could barely keep the excitement out of my voice. "I'd love to come in for an interview." The interview was set for Tuesday. That weekend, I researched the library, practiced my talking points, and took out the navy blue dress I'd managed to save from the house. For the first time in months, I felt like I had something real to look forward to. On Monday night, as I was pressing that dress, there was a knock at the door. Everett answered, and the moment I heard the voice, my stomach turned to ice. "I need to talk to Viola." "Romy." I stepped into the hallway and saw her standing there, looking smaller somehow. Her expensive clothes were wrinkled, her makeup smudged, dark circles under her eyes. "What do you want?" Everett asked, his voice cold. "Please," she said, looking straight at me. "Just 5 minutes. I need to say something." Against my better judgment, I nodded. 5 minutes. She stepped inside. I could smell alcohol on her breath, not drunk, but definitely drinking. "I've been thinking," she began, her voice unsteady, "about what happened. About what you said." I waited, saying nothing. "You were right," she whispered. "About me. About not really loving Everett the way I should have. About loving the idea of being married to him more than actually loving him." Everett started to speak, but I lifted a hand to stop him. Romy kept talking, words tumbling out in fragments. "I wanted the perfect life, the perfect image, the respect, the admiration, the storybook version of being a military wife. I wanted to tell people my husband was a hero, that we were this perfect American family." She paused, wiping her nose with the back of her hand. "But I didn't want the reality of it," Romy said, her voice trembling. "I didn't want deployments, the worry, or a husband who would ever put his mother before his wife. I thought if I could just manage the inconvenient parts, hide them, fix them, I could have the perfect life I wanted. "So you decided to manage me?" I asked quietly. Her answer came out like a sob. "Yes. I thought if I could control things, make you smaller, quieter, less visible, then everything would look perfect when Everett came home." "By humiliating me? By making me feel worthless?" She nodded, tears spilling down her face. "I told myself you were being dramatic, that you were fine, just difficult. But you weren't. You were grieving, scared, and alone. And I made it worse because it was inconvenient for me." The honesty was raw, almost painful. A part of me wanted to comfort her, but a stronger part stayed silent, the part that had finally learned to value its own dignity. "I don't expect forgiveness," she said. "I don't deserve it. I just wanted you to know that I understand now what I did, what I became." She turned to Everett. "Your mother raised a good man, a man with real values and real love. I would have destroyed that eventually." With that, she turned and walked out, leaving silence behind her. "That was unexpected," Everett said at last. "Yes," I agreed. "It helps to know she understands, but some damage can't be undone, even with understanding." The next morning, I walked into the Riverside Community Library for my interview, feeling steadier than I had in months. Margaret Chen, the director, greeted me with a kind smile and a firm handshake. "Tell me about yourself, Mrs. Harrington." I found myself talking not just about jobs and experience, but about life raising Everett alone, the hardships, the losses, the rebuilding. Instead of shame, I felt pride. When I finished, Margaret nodded thoughtfully. "You've faced more than most. How do you think those experiences would help you here?" "When you've had to rebuild your life from nothing," I said slowly, "you learn how important places like this are, a space where people can learn, feel valued, and start over." Margaret smiled. "When can you start?" I walked out of that library with something far greater than a paycheck, a purpose, and the sense of worth I thought I'd lost forever. That evening, Everett and I celebrated with dinner at a small downtown restaurant. As I watched him across the table, I felt an overwhelming pride. "You know," I said, "I think I owe Romy a thank you." Everett nearly choked on his water. "What?" If she hadn't shown me how far I'd fallen, how little I'd valued myself, I might never have found the strength to stand again. "Mom, you've always been strong." "No," I smiled softly. "I've been surviving." "That's different. After your father died, after I lost the house, I was grateful for scraps of kindness. I forgot that I deserved to be treated with respect." I paused, remembering that day in the hallway, the slap, the laughter, and then Everett's face when he walked in. "But when I saw you that day," I said, "I remembered something I'd forgotten." "What's that?" he asked. "That I raised you to be better than that, to stand up for what's right, to protect people who can't protect themselves, to value character over convenience, and if I raised you to be that kind of man, then I must be that kind of woman." Everett reached across the table and took my hand. "You are, Mom. You always have been." 2 months later, I was settled into my new job and loving every minute of it. The library had become my sanctuary, a place where experience mattered more than age, and kindness was part of the culture. Even better, I'd found something I never expected again: friendship. The volunteers were a mix of retirees and students, all united by a love of books and learning. For the first time in years, I had a community that saw me, not just someone's mother or widow, but Viola. One afternoon, while organizing new arrivals, a man approached the desk. "Excuse me," he said with a gentle smile, "I'm looking for information about your volunteer literacy program." He was about my age, with silver hair and kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. "I'm Robert," he said, extending his hand. "I just retired from teaching English and I'd like to stay busy." "I'm Viola," I replied, shaking his hand, "and I think we can definitely find a place for someone with your experience." As I showed him around the library, I realized I was genuinely enjoying our conversation. Robert was thoughtful, funny, and easy to talk to. When we finished, he smiled again. "Would you like to grab coffee sometime?" For the first time in a long while, I felt my heart lift, not in dependence, but in possibility. That night I sat by the window of my small new apartment, watching the city lights shimmer through the glass. I'd lost everything once, but somehow in starting over I'd found myself. And maybe that was the greatest victory of all. "I'd love to hear more about your experiences here," Robert said with a smile. I hesitated for a moment, then smiled back. "I'd like that." That evening, I called Everett to tell him about my day, about my first coffee with Robert. "Mom, that's great," he said, and I could hear the grin in his voice. "You deserve good things in your life." "It's just coffee," I protested. "It's a beginning," he corrected gently, "and beginnings matter." When I hung up, I realized he was right. This was a beginning not just with Robert, but with this new version of myself. The woman who knew her worth, who refused to settle for less than respect, who finally understood the difference between merely surviving and truly living. I looked around Everett's apartment, my home for the past few months, and felt an ache of gratitude for the roof over my head, for the son who had stood up for me when I couldn't, for the journey that had reminded me who I really was. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new chances, but tonight I was exactly where I belonged, surrounded by love, strengthened by adversity, and ready for whatever came next. For the first time in longer than I could remember, I was happy. 6 months later, I stood in the kitchen of my own apartment, a small, bright one-bedroom 10 minutes from the library, making coffee for two. Through the window, the sunrise painted the sky pink and gold. The furniture was second-hand, the curtains from a discount store, and the kitchen table wobbled slightly. But it was mine. Every dish, every book, every picture on the wall had been chosen by me, paid for with my own earnings. After feeling like a burden for so long, that independence felt nothing short of miraculous. Robert emerged from the bathroom, his silver hair still damp. We'd been dating 4 months now, taking things slow, learning each other's rhythms. The careful patience of two people who understood that real love is something you build, not chase. "Coffee smells wonderful," he said, dropping a kiss on the top of my head. "I made your favorite," I replied. "Extra strong. Just a touch of cream." This was our Saturday ritual: coffee, newspapers, easy laughter. A quiet kind of happiness I once believed was gone forever. "Any plans for today?" he asked. "Everett's coming for lunch," I said. "He says he has something to show me." Robert smiled. He and Everett had developed an easy respect for each other. Robert understood that my son would always be the most important man in my life, and Everett appreciated that Robert treated me with the kindness I deserved. "He's been mysterious all week," I added. "Just keep saying it's a surprise." An hour later, Robert headed home to tend his garden, and I began preparing lunch. As I worked, I thought about everything that had changed in a single year. The library had given me more than a paycheck. It had given me purpose, helping job seekers, guiding students, encouraging older patrons to learn new skills. Every day reminded me that my experience was valuable, my voice still mattered, and somewhere along the way, I'd found courage too. When a rude patron once shouted at a young volunteer, I'd stepped in without hesitation, firmly escorting him out and reminding him that respect was not optional. The old Viola would have stayed silent. The new Viola knew better. At noon, Everett arrived carrying a manila folder and wearing the kind of grin that meant he was up to something. "What's in the folder?" I asked, hugging him tight. "Patience, Mom," he said. "Lunch first, then surprises." Over grilled cheese sandwiches and tomato soup, his favorite since childhood, we talked and laughed like the years had folded in on themselves, and for a moment the world felt simple again. I didn't know what surprise waited in that folder, but as I looked at my son's smiling face, I realized that life had already given me everything I needed: a second chance, a home, and the unshakable belief that I was enough. For the first time in years, I wasn't just surviving life, I was living it. The divorce from Romy had been finalized 3 months earlier, and while I knew Everett was still healing from the betrayal, he seemed lighter these days, more like the young man I'd raised than the conflicted husband he'd become. "Have you heard from her at all?" I asked carefully. We rarely spoke about Romy anymore, but sometimes I wondered. "Not directly," he said, "but I heard she moved to California, got a job with a tech company." He paused, thoughtful. "I hope she finds whatever it is she's really looking for." I smiled, quietly proud of him. It would have been easy for him to stay angry, to wish her pain, but Everett had chosen something stronger: peace. He'd decided to build instead of break, to look forward instead of back. "Now," he said, finishing his sandwich with a grin, "are you ready for your surprise?" He opened a manila folder and spread several papers across the table. They looked like real estate listings. My heart sank a little. I loved my little apartment, loved my independence. If this was his way of convincing me to move somewhere better. "Everett, I appreciate what you're trying to do, but I'm happy where I am." "I know, Mom," he said gently. "That's not what this is about." He slid the listings closer. "These are houses I can afford with my savings and benefits." I frowned, confused. "I don't understand." "I want to buy a house," he said simply. "A real home with a yard, extra rooms, space for both of us." He leaned forward, eyes bright with excitement. "I want us to live together again, Mom, not because you need help, but because I miss having you in my life every day." The words washed over me like sunlight. "Everett, you're grown. You have your own life. And that life is better with you in it," he said firmly. "We're family. We've always been a team." I looked down at the listings, not just at houses but at possibilities. A garden where I could grow vegetables again, a kitchen big enough for Robert to cook beside me, a guest room for friends from the library. "What about your future?" I asked softly. "What happens when you meet someone new? Start a family?" He smiled. "Then we'll figure it out when the time comes. Right now, this is what I want." I looked at my son, the man who had saved me in more ways than he'd ever know, and felt my heart swell with love and pride. "Show me your favorites," I said. That afternoon we drove around town, visiting one listing after another. By evening we found it. A modest 3-bedroom house with a big front porch, a stone fireplace, and a backyard perfect for barbecues. "This one feels right," I said, standing in the living room. "It does," Everett agreed. "It feels like home." That night, over dinner with Robert, I told him our news. I worried he might feel uncertain about my living with Everett again, but his reaction was pure warmth. "That's wonderful," he said instantly. "Everett's a good man and you two have something special. Besides," he added with a grin, "that house has a better kitchen. I can't wait to cook in it." His easy acceptance filled me with gratitude. This was what healthy love looked like: flexible, supportive, never restrictive. 3 months later, we moved into our new home. Everett took the master bedroom. I chose the sunny room overlooking the garden. The 3rd bedroom became a shared study half-library projects, half-military paperwork. Our housewarming was small but perfect. Robert brought wine and helped me arrange the buffet. Margaret from the library came with her husband, and several of my volunteer friends joined us. A few of Everett's fellow soldiers arrived with their families, and suddenly our quiet house was filled with laughter and the smell of grilled food. From the back porch, I watched Robert showing a group of kids how to identify the birds in our yard, while Everett flipped burgers, laughing with his friends. In that moment, I felt something I hadn't felt in years: complete, peaceful, whole. The scars of the past hadn't disappeared, but they'd shaped something stronger, something beautiful. I'd lost everything once, and gained so much more in return. A son who'd become my hero, a home built on love and respect, and a second chance at happiness that I thought I'd never have again. And as the sun dipped below the horizon, I realized that sometimes the hardest endings lead to the most beautiful beginnings. This was what I'd been working toward my entire life without even realizing it. Not the perfect house or the perfect family, but this: A life built on authenticity, respect, and genuine love. "You look happy," Margaret said, joining me on the porch. "I am," I replied. "For the first time in a very long time, I'm exactly where I belong." Later that night, after everyone had gone home and the dishes were done, Everett and I sat on the porch swing, watching the stars appear one by one. "Do you ever regret it?" I asked softly. "The divorce, starting over? All of it?" He thought for a long moment. "I regret marrying someone who could be cruel to you," he said. "I regret not being there when you needed me most. But I don't regret leaving her. And I don't regret this." He gestured toward the house, our home, our new beginning. "This feels right in a way my marriage never did." "What about when you meet someone new?" I asked. "Then I'll meet someone who understands that you're part of the package," he said with a smile. "Someone who sees having you in our lives as a blessing, not a burden. Someone who sees you the way Robert does." His words made me smile. Robert and I had been talking about moving in together, taking the next step, and for the first time in decades, the idea of sharing my life again didn't scare me. It felt like a gift. "You know what the best part is?" Everett continued. "Watching you become yourself again, the real you. Not the version who thought she had to shrink to deserve love." His words brought back the memory of that terrible day, the slap, the humiliation, the moment I almost forgot who I was. "I almost lost myself completely," I admitted, "if you hadn't come home when you did." "But I did," he said gently. "And you found your strength again. That's what matters." We sat in silence, listening to the night sounds of our quiet neighborhood. A dog barked somewhere down the street. A car passed, its radio playing softly. Ordinary sounds from ordinary lives. And I realized this was happiness. Not grand gestures or dramatic moments, but peaceful evenings on porches with the people you love, kitchen tables where you can simply be yourself, work that gives you purpose, relationships built on respect, not need. "I love you, son," I whispered. "I love you too, Mom," he said. "Always." 6 months later, Robert and I were married in our backyard beneath the old oak tree. Everett walked me down a path lined with flowers. Margaret from the library stood beside me as my maid of honor. It wasn't the wedding of a young girl's dreams. It was something far better. A celebration of second chances, built on respect, equality, and choice. "I promise," I said, looking into Robert's kind eyes, "to love you not because I need you, but because I choose you, every single day." "And I promise," he replied, "to love the strong, independent woman you are, not someone who needs fixing or saving." That night, as we cleaned up from the reception, I looked through the kitchen window and saw Robert and Everett outside, laughing as they built a small fire in the backyard. The sight filled me with such peace it almost took my breath away. Sometimes I still thought about Romy, wondering if she'd ever found what she was searching for. I hoped she'd learned, as I had, that true happiness can never come from controlling others. That love isn't about power or perfection, but about lifting each other up. Mostly, though, I thought about gratitude. For my son, who stood up for me when I couldn't stand up for myself. For the man who loved me as an equal. For the work that gave my life meaning. For the community that saw me exactly as I was. I'd lost a house, but found a home. I'd lost security, but gained something deeper. The knowledge that I could rebuild from nothing and create a life worth living on my own terms. At 65 years old, I was finally exactly who I was meant to be. And that, I realized, was worth everything I had endured to get here. The future stretched wide before me, unwritten, unhurried, full of promise. Whatever came next, I would meet it with grace, courage, and the unshakable belief that I deserved every bit of joy life had to offer. And that was enough. More than enough. It was everything.